I loved the way you began the book. You seem to get so much value out of that first chapter because you've got the young Napoleon Bonaparte arriving in the city by water coach. So it's an unusual perspective on the city, and it's on the eve of the revolution. But you've also got, thinking ahead to what's going to come later. But also you've got his own sentimental story because he visits the Palais Royal, and so Paris as a sort of site of pleasure and possibly vice is sort of flagged up right from the start. So, I mean, it was doing a lot of different things.
Yes, that was, it's miraculous that story survived. It's Napoleon's own account of the loss of his virginity. He went to the Palais Royal deliberately to lose it. And that was the place that everyone headed for. Someone said it was the capital of Paris because it was just so much the centre. You could buy everything there, including sex. And also the way in which he arrived in Paris, as you say, by water coach, which was the most efficient way, most pleasant way to arrive in Paris. And it was nice to start with Napoleon. But Napoleon, before he became Napoleon, he was just a young lieutenant. You were asking about motifs, and one thing that surprised me was how I didn't really want to write about famous people, but obviously there's a lot more information about famous people and obscure people. And I did find, though, that they can be presented, as it were, anonymously, and that means that you can write about well-known people but still give a sense of what it's like to be an individual in that huge mass of people.
The writing often has the vividness of a novel, and I wondered what sort of rules you set yourself for when you deploy and how you deploy your imagination in telling these stories in different voices.
Well, as you say, it is novelistic. I think I'd say they were dramatized rather than fictionalized. It's really an attempt to, as I said, to use different voices, but to represent the historical truth. I mean, the thing about writing about famous people is that if you are writing imaginatively, you need a huge amount of information for your imagination to work freely, because you can't be hampered by missing information. And if you have missing information, then that's very dramatic too. You can use that in a particular way. That was why it's so much fun writing the book, because it's a big question in historiography. Is it possible to present historical information so that it's objectively true in using other conventions, rather than using what at the moment is the academic convention for writing history? There's a very particular style, very particular kind of syntax even in the writing of history that's recognized as historical writing. And what I didn't want to do was go too far the other way and just use this as base material for my own imagination, because I have no huge interest in my own imagination. I'm interested in the material I'm working with.
So, for example, just to take a sort of example, you described the 2.5-hour visit that Adolf Hitler made to Paris after the Germans had won a victory. What went into that sort of reconstruction on the page?
The Hitler tour of Paris, this 2.5-hour tour after the Nazis had marched into France, was, in some ways it was very easy, because almost everyone who was on that little tour wrote about it, left their memories, and of course there's the newsreel, and there are also photographs. So that was, there was so much that could be said about it, and it's very interesting. We have very specific little events like that. What actually happened when they went to the Arc de Triomphe, or what happened when they looked at the Eiffel Tower. You have different views of the same thing, which actually correspond quite closely. It's interesting how vividly everyone seemed to remember, vividly and accurately. The real idea behind it was to show Hitler as a tourist. This is the city without people in it. And is it still Paris if there are no people in it? So there's quite an eerie effect. It is Hitler doing a fairly conventional tourist's tour of Paris, but at the same time assessing it as a material object, just a pile of stones. He wanted to see it because he was trying to get ideas for the new Berlin.
And I was quite pleased that he didn't really get Paris. He left with a sort of sense of disappointment, and I thought that's rather good actually. And off he goes to plan his sort of bombastic emendations to the cityscape of Berlin. And I thought in a way it would have been disappointing if Hitler had got Paris.
Yes, it's quite sad and pathetic. I mean, if we didn't know what Hitler went on to do, it's almost like he's like a child who's always wanted to go to Paris. He'd never been there before. It was his first visit. And of course, he was obsessed with his model of Berlin. It would be on a table, and he'd get down and look at it in the way a child looks at its train set, trying to bring it into reality. And he just, it is nice that he didn't get Paris at all. And it's almost poignant in a horrible sort of way. Of course, he'd flip from one side to the other. I mean, he was most of all an extremely boring person. He would talk for hours on the same subject. People would be falling asleep, and they'd wake up and he'd still be talking. So it was nice to, I wanted to do almost a kind of Chaplin-esque black and white film, because it is, the newsreels are like a black and white film, these little men sitting in their cars, bouncing along the cobbled boulevards, looking at the great sights and pointing at this and thinking what wonderful things they're going to do.
Graham, let me ask you in conclusion about cyclists' Paris, because you have a particular interest in that, and at the end of the book you write about how you try to, I suppose, inscribe yourself on the map of Paris. So tell me what you were doing there.
As a cyclist in France, one is aware of crossing mountain cols. It's rather like the Munros in Scotland, the mountains, that you collect them. And there's a club called the 100 Cols Club, which you can join after you've crossed 100 cols. So when I discovered one that used to exist, or still does, in Paris, that was very exciting, because I thought, now I can be the first cyclist knowingly to cycle over a mountain in Paris. And everyone has the feeling that you get so much out of Paris, and I did want to give something back to it. I thought, now that everyone's cycling around on the Vélib, the free rental, or almost free rental bikes, wouldn't it be nice to give a mountain back to Paris? Because that's what Stendhal always complained about. Paris is all very well, but it doesn't have any mountains.
And if people read the book, they'll find out how you get on.
That's right, they will.
Graham Robb. Parisians, An Adventure History of Paris is out now in hardback. You can find full details on the Blackwell website at blackwell.co.uk. That's all for this podcast from Blackwell Online. So until next time, thank you for listening, and goodbye.